So welcome to Wix. This is the second meetup in a series of meetups regarding Wix Code. We'll speak of Wix Code later on as the use case in my talk. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ziv. I'm a former developer of Wix Code. Recently moved to a new product called Wix Experts. The next best product of Wix. It is currently under the radar, but soon we will launch it, so stay tuned. What I'm going to speak about today is error reporting and how we can do a smarter error reporting while running along multiple applications ecosystem. I will explain that further as well. So I'm very excited to be here. Let's break the ice a little bit. Regarding my job here at Wix, I'm also a DJ. This was taken a few months ago in Riga. I was the great honor to DJ together with one of Riga's most famous DJs. We were DJing back to back. She's mixing mine, I'm mixing hers. It was a blossom of a party. And I'm volunteering as an emergency medical technician, which is in Hebrew chovesh. I volunteer in United Atzala, try to save lives when medical incidents are happening around me. I'm available 24/7, not always going, again, volunteer, but try to do my best. So, error reporting, focus. Who recognizes this kind of prompt? When the operating system or anything else in software asks us to report regarding an error or something that was not, done correctly. Who is the nice person, decent person enough to actually report it? None of you? And you're all developers? So I do send information. I don't care to send information. It helps to make better software. Are you using error reporting in your software? Yes, no, don't be shy. You are using error reporting, right? So you probably would like the users to report errors when they happen. So why do you even use error reporting systems? It's an open question.
Do you only refer to user error reporting? No.
No. Any kind of error reporting. I'm not talking about log monitoring or something like that. Like error reporting, when the software is crashing, you might want to know about it in your R&D center. So who is using error reporting? By raising hands. Okay, why do you use error reporting?
Make the software better.
Okay, make the software better. Why else?
Make the users feel less frustrated.
Okay. Right, correct. Anything else you have in mind?
It is easier to solve the problem.
Exactly. It is easier to solve the problem because usually error reporting tools are coming with the correct, the correct tools to reproduce the steps that cause that error. So it is much better than any other QA, and you have the reports coming to you in real time. More than that, consider that when the user faces an error in your application and he bothers to raise a call to your customer support, upon each such user, you have a lot of other users that will eventually silently leave your application without even let you know about it, and that is bad if your users are the main business, the main thing that makes your business profitable. The next thing is that error reporting might help us know, especially in front-end systems, it might help us know that when the user is not doing the right flow. And when you get more and more errors about incorrect flow from a lot of different users, that means that maybe you have to rethink about your product, your user experience. Something maybe is not designed that in a clear way of what the user needs to do with the software. It's also great for test, because when we get the error, we can write a test, especially if you're working with TDD. You can write a test to reproduce that same error and make sure that this error will never happen again. And last, as I think you were saying before, it will make your user much happier, because the user will see the changes. He will see a live R&D behind the scene, and he will sense that things are happening for him. So we had a problem in Wix Code. Let's take a look about what Wix Code is. So Wix Code is relatively a new product in Wix, in which the user can write code in the editor. So if this section was like the old editor, now it has more sections, like a tree of files, like front-end files, back-end files, databases. There is a notepad for writing code here. Of course, it can be expanded. And this actually a revolutionary product of Wix, because it actually lets the user write web applications instead of just static websites. So it's very powerful. And in Wix Code, we are using Sentry as our error reporting system. Is anyone familiar with Sentry? OK, great. So to those of you who are not familiar with Sentry, Sentry is an error reporting system where you usually take their SDK in your own language, whether it's JavaScript, Java, Python, etc. You implement their script, and then it will start to report about problems. You can even do like manual reporting, or they can listen to your application memory state, user clicks, XHRs, a lot of great stuff that eventually, if there are errors, so this is how it looks like, a list of errors, and within each error you have all the data that is being sent within that error. The data, by the way, is non-user related data. I mean, we don't know who the user is, and it doesn't important for error reporting. I mean, certain user has done XYZ steps and faced some error. Okay, so maybe I have a note for myself next time to show how a real report looks like. So in Wix Code, there are two kinds of scopes, two kinds of runnable code. One of them is our own code, okay? Our own code that makes Wix Code alive, that makes Wix Code running in the Wix editor. And the other code is the user code. Now, our users might be designer, might be a software engineer, might be even a granny that try to gather around all of its grandchildren album. So consider how many errors those kind of users are creating. And even if they are like the most talented JavaScript developers, still when we are developing, we create errors. We are developing, try to do something, run the code, oops, we forgot something undefined, something is null, something is not correctly done right. So even those kind of user generates a lot of code. But their code is running together with our code, okay? It's running together with the same thread. So if the user have some error and we have some errors, so eventually all the error reporting send all of those errors as if they were our own errors. So at first it was nice when we were in the alpha phase of Wix Code. We saw the errors. We like to see that, hey, we have some users that are trying some stuff, playing with our system. We didn't really care about it too much. But then when we open up to beta users, more and more users used Wix Code very widely, took it to the limit, and eventually we were swamped with error reporting, with error reports that are not our own errors. And when we wanted to go over the errors to see, okay, we have some error reports in Sentry, let's fix some, we could not differentiate. Like it took hours to eliminate all those user code errors and to see only our errors so we can handle. So this is when I got the task, and the task was kind of simple. What we need to do is somehow tag the user code errors so we will not report them eventually. We actually could not even go live like GA, Wix Code product, without this is being done, because if we have opened Wix Code to the wild world, our reporting system was not, could not handle this kind of scale. So, so we need error reporting. We need, we need error boundaries. So part of the things that we were considering is we are using the same API as our users, okay? Like if we want to communicate with the database, and so we have like an API to that database, and this is the exact same API that our user is communicating with his database. So we thought, okay, we can just duplicate that class of the database API, for example, and when that class of the user class API will be running, and if something will fail there, we will just ignore it. Right? Sounds very naive. But when we think about it, as software engineers, when we hear the word duplication, we try to, feel not to feel good, and it raises a lot of red flags. So we cannot do that. The second thing was to somehow flag the function. Okay, what flag function means? Let's take a look. So if I have this API object, and there are two functions, foo and bar, what I would like to do is to, for example, I took loaded map values, that for each function in API, I'm adding a flag and return the function. And eventually, what I return to the user API is this one. So here I don't have any kind of duplication. It seems to be readable, and I don't even get my bundle size larger. Consider that with the previous duplication, I would have to have a larger package size every time I duplicate a class. But I don't know, it seems like very hacky, right? Has anyone done something like that before? face something like that. Maybe not he is doing, but maybe one of his teammates. So yes, this is also not that intuitive of, okay, what can I do with it? How can I test it? If something wrong is happening, what can I do with the error? I don't know what causes that error, what function. I don't have the function reference anymore to check that flag. So this idea and approach dropped off the table. So we had a few more ideas, but eventually we ended up with defining scopes in our application, in our code. And what we wanted to do in each scope is when a function is being called, we wanted to know in which scope it is running. So our final solution looks like that. Well, this is the function of the error boundaries. We get, okay, it's okay. We get a list of scopes. Okay, you can define whatever scope you would like, and an error handler function. Error handler is the function that eventually will be used by the catch clauses that we will see up next. So what we are doing with the scopes and error function. We define a boundary object, and for each scope, I add the scope to the boundaries, and what I do is I create error scoping factory for that exact boundary. Let's take a look about on the error scoping factory. So this is a factory function that gets the scope and error handler and return the function to be wrapped, okay, with its arguments. So what it does, it runs the function here, okay, it runs the function here, gets the result, and eventually returns the result. Now, if something happens along the way, I have this catch clause, and then I will call the error handler, which I will pass the error and the scope. Okay, so now when I have an error handler that know what the error is and what the scope, I can apply my own logic. Like if the scope is coming from my own code, I will report about it. If the error is coming from a user code, I don't want to report about it. Or maybe I would like to report about it to somewhere else. But I have now, I have more control of which error I would like to report and where to. And for the final lines here, I check that whether this function might be an asynchronous function. So in case it is returning a promise, this is what I check here. Then I return the result after I added my catch block of the promise, and do the same thing. In the catch block, I get the error and calling error handler. Questions up so far? I see that something is not clear, maybe? Or is it okay? Okay. So the next thing that we might want to do is to test this entire solution, okay? And we in Wix love testing. We love testing so much that I think we have more lines of code of testing than the lines of code regarding the real applications that we do in Wix. So what are the challenges in testing this kind of things? So first of all, we have to simulate bugs in Wix Code. So simulating bugs is not just writing tests of a rainy day scenario test. We actually have to look for bugs or simulate bugs. But this is kind of a paradox, because while we were looking for a bug, if we have found a bug in our application, we need to fix that and not use it for testing. So this is challenge number one. Change number 2 is that we have a lot of API in Wix Code. Part of it is not in our own R&D team, it's in other Wix teams. And we have to cover all of Wix Code APIs. So, and by the way, we cannot use stubbing. Okay, why we cannot use stubbing? Any ideas? When we normally want to test a rainy day scenario, an exception scenario, we use stub for a simple function, and then we just throw an exception or return whatever we want in this stub. So I'm wrapping the function. So if I'm wrapping and stubbing this one, what's stubbing do? Okay, like a sign-on or just a function. It wraps the real function and replaces it with another one, right? The one that you are giving in your stubbing as your stubbing function. So if I want to test this mechanism, I cannot stub that, okay? Because the function is no longer that. It's a stub of that. Okay, so the same thing with in this solution. If I want my code to run through this error boundary mechanism, then I cannot use stubbing. So eventually, we ended up with corrupting the upstate memory. We mocked a third-party library that we actually went over each API, saw what each API uses in order to damage their and corrupt their code. So if the original function is running, then eventually we get the error from the original function with the error boundary. And it was like a lot of work. The second thing is, how can we assert that a certain error was reported? Sentry doesn't have any test kit, at least not in JavaScript. And we try to find solution all over the internet, see what can be done about it. And eventually we found out that Raven, which is Sentry's JavaScript SDK, has a transport layer that can be overridden. This is Raven test kit, what we call Raven test kit. It gets the Raven instance. Raven, again, this is the only one thing that you need to instantiate in your application, and your application is connected to Sentry with error reporting. It's that easy. So in case you want to track and override the Raven instance transport layer, which is this is what we do in Raven test kit, is we get the Raven instance. We have our own report in memory, our own report list. We override the Raven transport layer. Raven transport layer is the transport layer. I mean, what Raven got an error, it wants to report it. You may override the transport layer. For example, the default is HTTP. You can override it to implement your own transport layer, or maybe you need to add more HTTP headers to the request if you have like a special cookie tokenizing, things like that you want to add to the headers or to the body of the report. So this is the way you can do it. So you get here the report. We get here the report. We push the report to that list, and that's it. We have the data, and we don't do anything else. That means that we don't eventually send the report. That means two things. First, we don't have to be online to work and run our tests, which is super great. The second is that we don't, send reports just for testing. I'm sorry, I'm getting emails. We don't send reports for testing. Okay, consider that on those testing that we are checking, we are sending reports and checking that. That's it. So we have like a nice, decent Raven Test Kit API where you can get all the reports, you can reset the list, you can get a report at a certain position, you can search for a report by the error code or by the error message, stuff like that. This is all open sourced. Both the error boundaries solution and this one are open sourced. And I will be happy to post the links later on so you can test it. You can take a look at it and maybe use it for your own needs. So let's sum up. So we had a problem of a lot of erroring were reporting to our Sentry system. The developers in my team could not do anything. They were swamped with errors, and it was very messy to try to pick each error and to see where it comes from. We had an idea of how to do and implement an error boundary mechanism. But then, again, testing. Actually, the testing of this task was much longer than actually write those a few lines that I've showed you. And we found a way of how we can intercept the Sentry sending reports and use that for testing. This solution was so successful, so Sentry even put it as a best practice in their own documentation, in their official documentation. So actually, after we achieved that, we understood that we did something really big that will affect a lot of people. So if you're using Sentry and you want to run some tests about what error are being reported in certain scenarios, consider going to Raven Test Kit, either by Google it or by Sentry documentation, and try to play with it. That's it. That was me. Thank you.